Hello, my name is S.K. Williams, and this is my second introduction to the Bishop's Bible. I am making 3 such introductions, and this one introduces you to the project itself. The project began many years ago, I believe in 2016, though I'm not entirely certain about that. And the way the project began is rather difficult to explain, because it didn't really follow a linear thought procession. Rather, the Bishop's Bible project, as I have been producing it, began as a rather haphazard and serendipitous project. One that wasn't even necessarily going to be a full project at first, and one in which grew in significance to me. You see, multiple different things happened at a specific moment in time that caused it to all align. I happened to be studying the history of English Bible translations. At the same time, I decided to purchase a used copy of Crazy Talk Animator. Not Crazy Talk Animator 2 or Crazy Talk Animator 3 or the later Cartoon Animator, as they started calling it, but the very first Crazy Talk Animator that was produced. The software was already out of date at the time that I got it, and had already been superseded by Crazy Talk Animator 2, but unlike later editions of Crazy Talk Animator, it came on a physical CD-ROM that I could load. This actually proved to be rather useful to me because it was cheap, and if I ever had to reload the program, I didn't have to go to the website and use it. I actually missed that about older software. But it was out of date, and while Crazy Talk Animator was praised in its day, it never produced glorious results, only usable results. And a lot of people in animation say that they prefer to use it in conjunction with other softwares to do the in-between work or to speed up certain aspects. But it is a bit cumbersome in some ways. Nevertheless, I purchased it and then decided to purchase iClone 5, which at the time was the highest level of iClone, and iClone 5 came with iClone 4 for free at the time. So I purchased 2 animation softwares, Crazy Talk Animator and iClone 5. And that began my animation career. And I was doing this at about the time that I was studying the history of religion, the history of the Reformation, and the history of the English Bible. At about the time that I was doing all of this, Prince William announced his wedding to Catherine Middleton. And on the Reallusion Content Store, they sold the Royal Wedding Kit. And I purchased it. And all of these may seem disparate. And it is. But I noticed that the Royal Wedding Kit was something that looked rather interesting to me. And I had purchased other sets as well. I had gotten the Hilltop Town set, the Seaside Town set, a medieval set, and various other sets. It wasn't unusual for me to purchase these sets, And my primary reason for purchasing it had nothing to do with the royal wedding. This isn't because I'm anti-royalist or don't care. I'm actually a monarchist, and I actually do appreciate the institution of the monarchy. But purchasing an entire kit simply to recreate a wedding seemed rather silly. But the royal wedding kit comes with the boulevard leading to the church, the exterior of Westminster Abbey, and the interior of Westminster Abbey, and I thought that I could use those as sets for various projects that I was planning on doing, most of which I didn't get around to because of various life circumstances, which I will briefly touch upon, as they will become deeply significant to the Bishop's Bible, which means that I will touch upon them more than just lightly in regards to the Bishop's Bible, but I will be touching on them deeply when it comes to what is relevant, and not so much so for other projects. For you see, I now had Crazy Talk Animator and the Royal Weddings kit, and I was studying the English translations of the Bible. And I found out that all of the major significant historical Bibles had audio Bibles made of them. The Wycliffe Bible, the Tyndale Bible, the Tyndale-Coverdale Bible, the Coverdale Bible, the Geneva Bible, and of course the ubiquitous Authorized Version, better known in America as the King James Version of the Holy Bible. And there were even a few of the minor or lesser known Bibles that had historical significance that also had audio Bibles. For instance, you can find the Webster's Bible in audio format, many of them for free, many of them offered through LibriVox, for instance. And all of them that had major historical significance were represented. All save one. For there was a grave historical injustice, and that historical injustice is that no one had created an audio book for the Bishop's Bible. So, I elected to take that task upon myself, although admittedly at first, considering how daunting the task would be and how time-consuming, I didn't know if I actually wanted to commit to it, but I could at least get the ball rolling and have a unique project. You see, I was still learning to animate at the time, so I looked at my royal wedding kit, and I noticed that all of the figures came with these blank bulb heads that are common for Crazy Talk Animator packs. Even though it was a royal wedding kit, they didn't put Prince William's face there, or Catherine Middleton's, or anyone else's. They were all blank faces. And they didn't, at the time they created the kit, know exactly what he would be wearing at the wedding, because it was made in advance of the wedding. As such, they have this blue dress uniform that looks somewhat naval, and they also have a suit and tie, a more contemporary, regular look. It, of course, turned out that William didn't wear either of those. He wore an Irish Guard dress uniform, and it's a more traditional red coat uniform with black facings, but they didn't know that at the time they created this. So they created two grooms that they thought would be more likely. A dress naval uniform that's dressed blue with a sash, and a suit and tie. It also comes with a bride and 3 bishops, all of whom were faceless. And at the time that I was learning to animate, I had thought I might be able to make a few short whimsical cartoons, but not really being good at it yet, I decided to start simple, and I had decided to, at first, simply create animations for my running commentaries. So I actually created a cartoon version of myself. And I had also purchased the Great Minds of Science set, which came with Archimedes and Einstein and Darwin. It also came with Isaac Newton, and it came with a woman whose name I can't recall right now, with apologies. But the Min proved to be more interesting for me anyway, because as a man myself, I can apply my cartoon self to them. You see, I normally wear suits and ties in real life. I'm not the t-shirt and jeans sort of guy. And I don't just mean I wear them professionally to work. I don't really like wearing the t-shirt and jeans around the house either. And Darwin came with a suit and tie. And while it's 19th century in design, it looks rather close to contemporary. It's not like he's wearing a frock coat. So I applied my cartoon head to Darwin's body and then modified it a little, making the body thinner because I'm not as rotund as the men in the Great Minds of Science pack were usually depicted. I changed the hands. But the suit I'm wearing is the Darwin suit, and that's became the normal standard version of me, the cartoon version of me that I put into my commentaries. But I also saved the head separately so I could apply it to other bodies, like Einstein, or like Isaac Newton. And I loved Isaac Newton's suit for formal occasions or for Christmas. I even used Archimedes. This is why I have a harder time remembering which particular woman it was that was in the Great Minds of Science. I'm not a woman and I didn't wear the dress, so to speak. At any rate, I'm learning to animate. I have a cartoon version of my head that I'm putting on bodies and modifying to fit new costumes. And I have these 3 bishops with blank faces from the Royal Wedding Kit. I'm studying the English translation history of the Bible, and I've noted that there is no audio book for the Bishop's Bible. So, I decided to apply my cartoon face to all 3 bishops. And then I chose one and decided to read Genesis chapter 1 and feed it in to the cartoon version of myself and have him read it. And I used the Royal Wedding Kit. And specifically, I used the Westminster Abbey exterior, the lawn. It looked okay, but I didn't burn the video yet. I saved it as a project. It didn't quite look right. So I decided to move myself closer to the tree and zoom the camera in to represent the tree in the Garden of Eden, for instance. And I did a few other things to it, and I decided to read the first 3 chapters. I even toyed with the idea of using 1 bishop per chapter because I, at the time, didn't know I was going to read beyond the first 3 chapters. But I forgot to do that, so that never happened. Not because I decided against it, I just simply forgot. And at this time, I was still trying to perfect the motion, but motion in the bishop's outfit didn't run as smoothly as it does with Darwin's body or with some of the other more regular bodies. They just can't get the robe to flow properly. Nevertheless, in the early videos, I move around quite a bit more than the later videos. In the later videos, I just stand still with the exception of my mouth moving, where I'm reading the text. But in earlier videos, I move about. But it still didn't quite look right, not only because of the rather poor way that the body model is put together and doesn't accommodate motion well, but it looked a little too empty. I also had a problem in trying to figure out how to pull it all together. So I decided I needed accompaniment. And at about that time, I was seriously thinking about reading the entire Bishop's Bible as an audiobook. And I realized that while I could load audio files online in various places, the best way to disseminate the work would be through video, since more people look at video channels. I never expected this work to catch on. I never expected this work to become particularly popular, and I still don't, and it's not. But I did want it available for the few people who would be interested in the Bishop's Bible. This is why it is presented the way it is. Perhaps not in the early chapters as much, but when I decided to take the project seriously, I also started pronouncing the words in a more historically correct way, including the German or French pronunciations that were still extant in 1568 when the Bishop's Bible was produced. That is why instead of saying covenant, I will often say covenant. That is why when I say ordinance, I will say ordinance. And while this wasn't natural to me at first, and it will sound somewhat stiff and artificial, I'm hoping it improves over time. Nevertheless, in the early days of the project, I realized I needed something more on the screen. So I found a painting of God. One of the great masters had painted it. And it's God the Father, as we typically portray him. The powerful, imposing man with a white or grey flowing beard. I didn't want to just cut the head out and put it on the body, though. The rest of the scene looks rather cartoonish, and while Westminster Abbey looks somewhat more photoreal, the rest of the things in the scene are very cartoonish. So I decided to make God the Father into a cartoon. And at the time, AI didn't really exist in the way that we would have it today. So I took a painting of God the Father and put it into an art program and put a layer over it and traced over it using a mouse because I didn't have a touch screen. Then, in order to tell my black outline from the back, I filled in the outline with solid red. Then I had a workable model, and I cut that model out and made a smaller image of it that only contained the head. And I call it my Godhead. Ba-dum-bum-bum. I then added color, looking at the original painting for inspiration. So the beard is a whitish gray, the hair is whitish gray, and their skin tone. Because my image was so small, I decided to wait to put the pupils and iris in, so the eyes were just one solid color. And in the painting, he has normal-looking eyes. But I had colored them a solid red in order to help make them easier to work with while creating a cartoon version. My intent was to go back in, recolor them white, and then to add irises and pupils. But I neglected to because I got distracted, and when I came back, I looked at a glance, the image was colored in, and I had thought I'd completed the work, and somehow I didn't notice the solid red eyes. I had also at the time decided that, since I will be doing more than one of these videos, that over time I want to use all three sets for the royal wedding and all of the characters that came with it and all of the props. And then it occurred to me that if I read the entire Bible, I could use each scene. I could use the Westminster Abbey exterior for the Old Testament, since I had already begun reading it with Genesis. I then decided that this would work very well with the New Testament, which could be shot inside the church, and it could even have symbolic meaning. Because, from a Christian point of view, God's promises of a Savior came to humanity who stood separately from God, who were outside of the fullness of God's promises and truth, but who were promised unity with God, as represented by the church. And the New Testament represents God being in full communion with man. So man is no longer outside of the church, but inside of the church, as in inside of God's blessings and grace. I also decided, unlike a lot of people today, especially within Protestantism, to read the Apocrypha, because it is part of the bishop's Bible. Regardless of how people may feel about it, it is part of the work. And lo and behold, I do have 3 sets. So for the Apocrypha, also known as the Deuterocanon, I shall be using the Boulevard set from the Royal Wedding Kit. This also allows me to use all of the characters over time. I haven't quite decided what I will do with the bride, but I do know that God is a trinity, and that I have 3 characters besides the bishops, and the bishops will all be me. I shall simply be in a different bishop's robe per testament. Thus, I shall use all 3 bishops. They will simply all be me. But what about the naval dress uniform, the suit and tie, and the bride? Well, the naval dress uniform is simple. I already put God's head on it, and God will be using that throughout. Or rather, God the Father will be. I decided that God the Son and God the Holy Spirit shall also be accompanying me. And while I haven't created at the time of this introduction the Apocrypha or the New Testament, and haven't decided whether I'm simply going to follow the traditional way of stating the Trinitarian formula of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, placing the Son in Apocrypha and the Holy Spirit in the New Testament, or whether I should keep Jesus in the New Testament, since we do mostly associate it with him, and place the Holy Spirit in the Apocrypha. What I have decided is that Jesus will be in the suit and tie of the groom. I don't exactly know what I will do with the bride, although at this point I have used the bride as a secondary figure in certain of my videos for the Old Testament. Nevertheless, I will figure it out. But my goal at this point is to use all 3 of the characters, all 3 of the scenes, and everything in the kit. And that is sort of the way this all fell together. I was studying the English translations of the Bible. I noticed a deficiency in the absence of an audio Bible for the Bishop's Bible. I was working with Crazy Talk Animator. Prince William announced his wedding to Kate Middleton. And lo and behold, I ended up falling into the Bishop's Bible. Keep in mind that the reason I'm doing video is because at the time, the only real video channels that I had were a Daily Motion channel and a YouTube channel, both of which I still have, although I haven't been able to access my Daily Motion channel since I have forgotten my password and haven't been able to recover it. I do intend on either creating a new Daily Motion channel or trying to get back into my old one. But for now, the Bishop's Bible Project will be on YouTube, on Ramble, and on the Shoot of Bit. The schedule for loading it will begin in 2026. This is actually the third time I've loaded this thing, but I'll get to that in a moment. You see, the Bishop's Bible is set to this whimsical animation, because at the time that I began creating it, you could not load audio files to YouTube. It had to be video files. The video files, of course, include audio, but you couldn't just load audio files. You can now, but you couldn't then. So my goal was to make them available. Of course, I could just do a black screen and allow the recordings to play in the background. It doesn't have to be this animation. For that matter, it could be images from the Bible. It could be paintings or such. But it's not. It's me as a bishop reading the text. And I just decided to do that because I had already begun my Crazy Talk animator that way, and I just decided to keep it up this way. Thus, you have an attempt at creating a scholarly audio Bible that preserves the original pronunciations of words, and that is set to a whimsical animation using an outdated software. Though, to be fair, my new plan with the software is to change it over time. I will read the entire Old Testament in Crazy Talk Animator 1, as I call it now, the Apocrypha in Crazy Talk Animator 2, and the New Testament in Crazy Talk Animator 3, to show progression of time. And every time I switch softwares, I shall also switch companions. And now to the more tragic events. When I first began this project, I didn't know if I would finish it, and I began it in a rather haphazard way. This is why the files were loaded in the early days on a less than regular schedule. But having said that, I also decided about this time to begin reading the Great Bible Psalms. This may seem odd because this project is about reading the Bishop's Bible. But the Great Bible Psalms are actually part of the Bishop's Bible. You see, when the Bishop's Bible was released in 1568, it had an original new translation of the Book of Psalms integrated into it. However, people didn't like the Psalms in the Bishop's Bible. They were clunky and they were harder to read. People preferred the Psalms from the Great Bible, which in turn were a minor revision of the Psalms from the Coverdale Bible. They were easier to read, people had already memorized them, and they flowed better with melody. As such, they began printing the Psalter in the Book of Common Prayer. And over time, in later editions of the Bishop's Bible, they began including the Great Bible Psalms alongside the Bishop's Bible Psalms, often in parallel columns, so that you would have the Bishop's Bible Psalms in one column and the Great Bible Psalms in another. In the later editions of the Bishop's Bible, they simply completely removed the Bishop's Bible Psalms and replaced them wholly with the Great Bible Psalms. As such, because I want to be a completist. I began reading the Great Bible Psalms as part of my Bishop's Bible project. At first, I didn't have a uniform way of introducing them, like I do with the Bishop's Bible. With the Bishop's Bible, I always introduce each chapter as book, chapter number, from the Bishop's Bible. Or something along the lines of Genesis, chapter 1, from the Bishop's Bible. With the Great Bible, I would often introduce it as Psalm 1, from the Great Bible, without mentioning the Bishop's Bible. But I realized that since I was presenting it for the Bishop's Bible project, I should make note of that. And the first 12 Psalms don't. So for this project and its relaunch, I took the original 12 Psalms that I had created. I decided not to re-record them, and I decided not to simply chop off the introduction and create a new one. I decided to use Desgo, and I took a single frame from the Psalms, ran it through Desgo, created some variations, and then inserted it into the Psalms. The audio quality is different and, quite frankly, inferior. I was using this machine to record them. But it marks the clear difference whilst preserving the original work, which is important to me. I have, of course, kept the original 12 as they are, and you can look at them. But for the first 12, there is a break in audio quality and style to regularize them with the introduction style that shall be done. And starting at 13, they're just read as per normal, although a few of them I have reread. But the Great Bible Psalms are being included in this work. Having said that, I originally released the chapters in a somewhat regular fashion, 1 or 2 chapters of the Bible a week, and I managed to get up to 15 chapters of the book of Genesis, and the first 50 Psalms from the Great Bible. But then my house burned down. And for 5 years, I did no work on this project at all. The project was veritably abandoned. But then I resurrected it from the dead and began recording new chapters from the Bible. I also decided to take this project much more seriously and much more regularly. And I decided to launch it in 2025, the second launch. Unfortunately, 2025 proved to be a rather challenging year. You see, I ran into financial difficulty. My old computer, my laptop, that I had been using well beyond its years, finally gave up the ghost, and I was forced to acquire this one. I didn't have money to buy a new one, so I bought a used one at a computer repair store. It is a Dell Latitude 5590. Its audio quality is much poorer, and it has much less storage, forcing me to rely on an external storage, but it works. And I began recording still. For most of the book of Exodus, or for all of it, I don't remember when exactly I made the transition, and through all of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, you have this poor audio quality. The same audio quality for my commentaries at the time as well, though, because this computer simply does not have good audio. I finally managed to get a new computer, though, and I will be using it from now on. So starting after the Torah, you will see a notable improvement in audio quality. But for now, you have this. And it's not because I care less about the Torah. I'm just working on with what I have. Still, during 2025, I was locked out of my TubeView channel because Gaggle believes in sorry, and I was mostly exclusively on Ramble with this project. I intended, of course, to put it on the Shoot a Bit, but I can't really schedule videos over there, so I'm much more haphazard over there still. I intend on creating a Dailymotion channel specifically for this project, but I haven't yet. But the project was an ongoing one over on Ramble, until I hit other difficulties in life that prevented me from properly recording. I had hoped to just stop releasing videos and then begin again in 2026 and use the rest of 2025 to record the rest of the Old Testament, but I couldn't do that either due to a variety of circumstances. But this is the way it unfolded, unfortunately. I have released more of my Bishop's Bible on Ramble than I have over here. You can see the entire, for my YouTube channel, I got to around 30, I think, chapters of the book of Genesis before I was kicked off. 36 chapters, I believe. I don't have internet access to check. But on Ramble, I have the entire book of Genesis and the entire book of Exodus, as well as every great Bible psalm for 52 weeks. And that is my new plan. But I was forced to abandon it there as well. So perhaps it is apropos, since I am now back on the TubeView, and the TubeView remains the largest video sharing platform in the world. I created a new channel, so hopefully my problems on my old channel won't follow me over here. And I will begin releasing these videos on Christmas Day of 2026, which I already have, if you're listening to this, the second introduction. My plan is very simple. Beginning on the first Sunday of the year of our Lord 2026, I shall release the first 3 chapters of the book of Genesis. And then, for 6 days a week, Monday through Friday, I shall release 3 chapters of the Bible a day for 18 chapters a week, for a total of 930 chapters throughout 2026. This will cover the entire Old Testament, which officially has 929 chapters. There is one that is added, but I will let you find out how I managed that. I do want there to be some surprises. Every Saturday, though, I shall release a psalm from the great Bible Psalms, and I shall release 52 per year. You may think that that's not possible since there are only 150 psalms. But I will be adding some supplemental material to this project, which will include 6 additional psalms. Psalm 151, which is famously used in Eastern Orthodoxy, as well as the 5 Syriac Psalms, which include Psalm 151 to 155, and a psalm from the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the few things that I'm adding that would have been utterly unknown to the translators of the Bishop's Bible. Indeed, it is the only thing that I'm adding that would have been utterly unknown to them. I'm not going to add anything to the project that was unknown to the Bishop's Bible, with the exception of perhaps a few things. At present, I plan only one. Which is to say, though, that I will be adding certain supplemental materials. When I read the Apocrypha, for instance, I'm not simply going to read the 7 books that Catholics include that Protestants don't, but everything that was in the Apocrypha in the Bishop's Bible, as well as in the extended Apocrypha that you get within the authorized version from later editions of it, like 3 and 4 Esdras, or 3 and 4 Ezra. First Ezra, of course, is the book of Ezra in the Old Testament, and second Ezra is Nehemiah. I will also be including 3, 4, and 5 Maccabees and a few other books used either by the Eastern Orthodox Church or the Oriental Orthodox Church, or perhaps the ancient Assyrian Church of the East. These books would have been known to the translators of the Bishop's Bible, however, even if not included. But they will help fill out the apocryphal section, which shall be the shortest otherwise. In fact, it will be the shortest even with these added. And I will make note when I add them. I will create a delineation system so that you will know which ones are actually part of the Bishop's Bible and which parts aren't. And then I shall proceed to the New Testament. But for the Old Testament, the only thing I'm really doing right now, I have created 930 chapters. Or rather, will record 930 chapters, which will be released 18 chapters a week for 52 weeks. Now, there was one minor problem. I wanted to release a great Bible psalm a week for 52 weeks, but the first Saturday of 2026 falls before the first Sunday. I also wanted to honor the history of this system, of this project. So what I've decided to do is I will be releasing the first psalm on the first Saturday and the second psalm on the second Saturday, but in a unique way that won't be reflected in the rest of the project. I will release the first 12 psalms from the Great Bible that I had already recorded without alteration on the first Saturday. This will be a prelude to the official Bishop's Bible project, because while they were created for the Bishop's Bible project, they are no longer the official version I use within it. Then I will begin the Bishop's Bible project proper on the first Sunday of 2026. And then on the second Saturday of 2026, but the first Saturday after I began the project, I will release the edited version of Psalm 1 and Psalm 2, releasing 2 psalms on the same day. And then afterward, in the second week of the project, I will release the third psalm, and so on, so that each Saturday of the year will get a psalm. This is how the project is to be arranged. And I hope that some enjoyment and pleasure is given. But do keep in mind, the original goal here is to have a scholarly reading of this Bible for historical posterity and study. Hence why, even though I didn't actually maintain this through the early parts of the text, a lot of the pronunciations will be off. And certain historical words like shall be will be included instead of breaking it into two words, shall be. It will sound a little funny at first, but it is necessary to preserve the historical integrity of the work. Having said all that, I shall make one final addenda, and it is one of style. I've already told you that for the entire Bishop's Bible, I shall be using Crazy Talk Animator, and I shall be using Crazy Talk Animator 1 specifically. For the Old Testament. But there will be a break in style. You see, I only created 15 chapters of the book of Genesis for the original Bishop's Bible project, and the first 50 Psalms. Then my house burned down, and I abandoned the project for 5 years. So, when I began the project again, I asked myself, do I simply resume as if nothing else happened? Do I acknowledge the break? My voice has changed over the years somewhat. So I decided to acknowledge the change, and I did so visually. I made some alteration to how I appear, not much, probably not noticeable. But I still wanted the project to look uniform to the past. I didn't redesign the cartoon version of myself completely. I didn't redesign God the Father. I didn't redesign my symbol that was in it, which is another thing I should mention, but I shall mention last. I wanted to keep the project uniform, but I also wanted to acknowledge the past. So, when I recorded the audio for Genesis chapter 16, 17, and 18, as well as 19 and 20 and 21 to some degree, I used a variety of still images that came from the older project's frames, and Desgo created alterations of still images and modifications that I made to make it look a little more unusual, tracings that I did over them. This creates a rather distorted or jarring initial look. But starting in Genesis chapter 16 and going to Genesis chapter 21, I mark the moment when my house burned down and when I resumed the work. Thereafter, I returned to using the standard method that I had been using in the past. And the same is true of the great Bible Psalms. They're all done by me animating myself as a bishop without the cape and without the mitre, of course, although I do sometimes wear the cape. In the hillside church, I use a different background for the great Bible Psalms because while they are part of the Bishop's Bible, they are not part of the Bishop's Bible. But I use the interior of the hillside church set for the great Bible Psalms. But when I get to Psalm 51, I use a variety of AI-generated alterations to a still frame. That will be so for Psalm 51, Psalm 52, and Psalm 53. Those mark the occasion of my house burning down and the resumption of the project. That having been said, I did forget to mention that the Great Bible Psalms are both part of the Bishop's Bible, but also not part of it. And I wanted to create a visual distinction from that. So I set it inside the Hilltop Church set that I had also bought. It also marks a bit of an inversion, because the Old Testament is outside the church, the New Testament is inside the church for the regular Bishop's Bible readings. But the Psalms, which are part of the Old Testament, are inside the church for the Great Bible. And this convention I shall use when I do other supplemental works. Inside for out, outside for in, and using a noticeably different set. There's one final thing, though, that I will mention. When I produce videos, I put my own symbol, a logo, at the end of every video. I didn't feel right doing so with the Bishop's Bible, though, because where would I put it? Would I put my logo at the end of every chapter? That felt wrong, because the chapters are not really the end of the work. Would I put them, though, at the end of each book of the Bible? A little more apt. Or perhaps at the end of each testament, or at the end of the entire work. Perhaps at the end of each testament and the end of the work, or the end of each book and the end of each testament, maybe all three. I decided that when I complete the Bishop's Bible work, I will do a final acknowledgements and credits, and my symbol will be used for that. But I would not put my symbol at the end of each chapter. I would in some way do it at the end of each book. But I didn't want to completely exclude the symbol either. So my symbol, a bird in a circle, a very stylized bird in a circle. I wanted it in the work, but I did not want it at the end of each chapter, so I have it as an accompaniment next to me and next to God the Father. And that is an appropriate place to end this introduction. I did a very bad job with this introduction. Perhaps I shall re-record the second introduction. But for now, I present you with the Bishop's Bible, and invite you to continue on with this project of mine, in the understanding that, as crude as it may be, it is a labor of love, and I hope that it benefits you in some small way.